A boy, abandoned at birth, who ends up challenging the whole world. A visionary who fell from grace, only to ally with his absolute greatest enemy. We're talking about a genius whose relentless pursuit of perfection literally changed our lives, yet who eventually succumbed to a fatal flaw. Welcome to Learning English with Rassa.
So, Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, right in San Francisco, California. But you know, from the very start, his life definitely wasn't simple. His biological parents were quite young and just not ready to raise a child, so they gave him up for adoption. He was taken in by Paul and Clara Jobs, who were this humble, incredibly loving couple. Paul was a mechanic, and he spent hours in the family garage teaching young Steve how to take apart radios and build electronics. And he taught him a really important lesson. He said, if you're gonna build something, make it the best it can be, even on the inside where no one will ever see it. And that lesson planted a huge seed. As a teenager growing up in Silicon Valley, Steve's curiosity just blossomed into this burning passion. He soon met Steve Wozniak, a brilliant engineer who could literally build incredible gadgets from scratch. The two Steves became fast friends. They started experimenting, and before long, out of a tiny garage in Steve's parents' house, they founded a company. They called it Apple. Their first product, the Apple I, was built entirely by hand. But Jobs wasn't satisfied with just a small side project. He had a relentless drive to push boundaries, to make technology accessible not just for the experts, but for everyone.
That drive? Well, it led straight to the Apple II, which was just this massive multi-million-dollar success. But Steve's true vision was still forming. He wanted to create a computer that wasn't just functional, but beautiful, a machine that actually felt friendly. And this vision eventually became the Macintosh. Launched in 1984, the Mac completely changed the game. It introduced the mouse and a graphical user interface where you could click on icons instead of typing out all these complicated commands. When Steve stood on stage to reveal it, he wasn't just showing off a piece of machinery. He genuinely believed computers were tools to help people unlock their creativity. He wanted technology to feel human. However, behind the scenes, Steve's demand for perfection was causing some deep friction. He pushed his teams incredibly hard, and honestly, his management style was often viewed as pretty harsh and uncompromising.
By 1985, all that tension just hit a breaking point. A massive power struggle erupted between Steve and Apple's board of directors. The board basically felt he was way too difficult to control. So, in a shocking turn of events, they actually voted to remove him from his leadership role. Steve Jobs was fired from the very company he'd built from scratch in his parents' garage. It was a devastating moment for him. He felt betrayed, publicly humiliated, and just completely lost. The whole identity he had built around Apple was suddenly stripped away. He stood on the outside looking in, a tech visionary without a home.
But, Steve didn't just disappear into the shadows. Not at all. He demonstrated incredible resilience. Looking back years later, he actually called getting fired the best thing that ever happened to him, mainly because the heavy pressure of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. Free to experiment, he founded a brand new computer company called Next, focusing on really advanced workstations for education. And right around the same time, he bought this small, struggling computer animation studio. That studio was Pixar. Steve believed in their potential, and with his backing, they released Toy Story in 1995, which was the world's first fully computer-animated film. It was a massive triumph. Meanwhile, without Steve's guiding vision, Apple was slowly failing, edging dangerously close to bankruptcy.
So jump to 1997. A desperate Apple did the only thing they really could do. They bought Next, bringing Steve Jobs back home. When he returned, the company was in absolute chaos. Steve immediately took control, canceling dozens of confusing projects so they could focus on just a few really great ones. But to actually save Apple, he had to make a highly pragmatic, pretty shocking decision. He turned to his biggest rival, Bill Gates. Microsoft and Apple had fought bitterly for years. Yet Steve secured a $150 million investment from Microsoft just to keep Apple alive. The truth was, Gates and Jobs were complementary figures. Gates understood massive scale and software logic, while Jobs understood design and the human experience. Together, their rivalry and their cooperation really shaped the entire computing industry.
With Apple finally stabilized, Steve just unleashed this wave of innovation that the world had truly never seen. In 1998, he introduced the colorful iMac. Then, in 2001, he introduced the iPod, famously promising 1,000 songs in your pocket. Suddenly, music was entirely portable. But the true revolution, the real game changer, arrived in 2007 with the iPhone. Before this, mobile phones were clunky, lots of plastic buttons, just difficult to use. Steve created a device with an intuitive touchscreen that brilliantly combined a phone, an internet browser, and a music player. It was so easy to use that literally a child could pick it up and understand it immediately. The iPhone wasn't just a successful product. It became a global phenomenon, entirely shifting how all of humanity communicates, works, and lives.
Yet, while Steve was busy out there changing the world, he was secretly fighting a terrifying, very private battle. In 2003, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. Now, doctors were actually relieved at first because it was a very specific type of tumor that was slow-growing and could be cured with immediate surgery. But Steve, a guy known for bending reality to his will, refused conventional medical advice. He just didn't want his body to be opened up. So instead, he spent 9 crucial months trying alternative therapies. Strict diets, acupuncture, herbal remedies, totally believing he could heal himself naturally. Sadly, by the time he finally agreed to have the surgery in 2004, the cancer had unfortunately spread beyond his pancreas.
That tragic delay unfortunately made the progression of the disease totally inevitable. As his health declined over the following years, Steve continued to work, rushing to put a dent in the universe before his time ran out. In 2005, he delivered a highly famous commencement address at Stanford University, where he spoke incredibly openly about love, loss, and death. His words carried profound weight. He urged the graduates not to waste their limited time living someone else's life. Steve Jobs passed away on October 5, 2011, at the age of 56. He left behind a legacy that is now permanently woven right into the fabric of our modern world.
All right, let's step back for a second and really look closely at the language we just used in this extraordinary story. We're going to analyze 10 essential words you definitely need to know. Our first word is relentless. The American pronunciation is relentless. Relentless means continuing in a severe or extreme way without ever becoming weaker or stopping. The etymology actually comes from the word relent, which has roots in the Latin relentiscere, meaning to slow down or soften. The suffix less means without, so to be relentless literally means to be without slowing down. Let's look at a synonym distinction. Both persistent and relentless mean continuing firmly. But persistent is usually positive or neutral, like a persistent student. Relentless is much stronger and intense. It can even be exhausting, like the relentless summer heat.
Let's see this in context. First, Steve Jobs was relentless in his desire to build perfect technology. Next, because of this, his relentless work ethic inspired his team, but it also exhausted them. And finally, ultimately, it was this relentless focus on design that made Apple unique. So in all of these contexts, relentless functions as an adjective. In the first application, it describes his intense, unstoppable desire. In the second, it perfectly captures the dual nature of the word. His work ethic never stopped, which was highly inspiring, but also incredibly tiring for those around him. In the final thought, it highlights that Apple never, ever compromised on their focus.
Moving to our second word, devastating. The American pronunciation is devastating. Devastating means highly destructive or damaging, and it can refer to physical damage or emotional shock. The etymology comes from the Latin word devastare, meaning to lay waste completely. Let's contrast it with a synonym. Damaging means causing harm, but devastating implies total destruction or overwhelming emotional pain. For example, a broken window is damaging. A hurricane destroying an entire city is devastating.
Let's apply this to his lowest point. First, being fired from Apple was a devastating blow to his confidence. Second, outside of business, the news of his cancer diagnosis was devastating for his family. Third, even on a corporate level, the failure of the new computer had a devastating effect on the company's finances. Here, devastating acts as an adjective used to describe extreme emotional or financial harm. We see that being fired wasn't just sad, it completely destroyed his sense of identity at the time. When discussing his health, it expresses the profound, crushing grief his family felt. And financially, it shows that the loss was severe enough to threaten the very existence of the company.
Our third word is resilience. The American pronunciation is resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's basically the mental ability to bounce back after a failure. The etymology is from the Latin resiliere, which literally means to leap back or rebound. Let's look at a quick synonym distinction. Toughness means being strong enough to withstand damage, but resilience implies flexibility. It's the ability to get knocked down and stand right back up again, much like a rubber band, stretching and returning to its original shape.
Notice how this shaped his next steps. First, Steve showed great resilience by starting a new company after losing Apple. Second, of course, building Pixar into a success required years of patience and resilience. Third, and on a broader scale, human resilience allows us to find hope even after a major failure. In these practical applications, resilience is a noun. We see exactly how he applied this trait. He didn't quit when times were hard, he simply adapted and started next. With Pixar, it emphasizes that success was an instant, and he had to continuously bounce back from creative struggles. Finally, it states a general rule about human nature, connecting his specific story to a broader life lesson we can all learn from.
Our fourth word is complementary. The American pronunciation is complementary. Complementary means combining in a way that enhances or emphasizes each other's qualities. The etymology comes from the Latin complementum, meaning that which fills up or completes. Now, be super careful with the spelling and the synonym distinction here. Complementary spelled with an I means giving praise or giving something away for free, but complementary spelled with an E means completing something else. For example, salt and pepper are complementary spices.
Let's look at this in the context of his greatest alliance. First, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates had very complementary skill sets. Second, looking at the devices themselves, the hardware and software of the iPhone were designed to be complementary. Third, this shows us that a successful team often consists of people with complementary talents. Operating as an adjective here, the word perfectly highlights that what Gates lacked, Jobs had, and vice versa. They completed each other in the tech industry. For the product, it explains that the physical phone and the digital code were built to fit together flawlessly. This provides a brilliant, practical business lesson. You want team members whose strengths naturally cover your own weaknesses.
Our fifth word is intuitive. The American pronunciation is intuitive. Intuitive means easy to use and understand without needing conscious thought or instruction. It comes from the Latin intuere, meaning to look at closely or consider. Let's contrast it with a synonym. Logical means making sense based on strict rules and steps. Intuitive means making sense based on human feeling and natural instinct. So a math equation is logical, but swiping your finger to turn a page on a screen is intuitive.
Let's look at the products themselves. First, the iPhone's touchscreen was so intuitive that anyone could use it. Second, he deeply wanted the software design to feel completely natural and intuitive. Third, as a leader, she has an intuitive understanding of what customers actually want. When describing technology in those first two thoughts, intuitive means the user absolutely does not need to read a manual. Their brain naturally knows exactly what to do. When we use it to describe a person's ability, like in that third sentence, it means they understand the customer instinctively and effortlessly, without needing to analyze a mountain of hard data.
Move in right along to our sixth word, phenomenon. The American pronunciation is phenomenon. Let's break those syllables down slowly. It's a tricky one. Phenom and non. A phenomenon is a remarkable or exceptionally outstanding person, thing, or event. It comes from the Greek word phenomenon, meaning that which appears or is seen. Let's look at a synonym distinction. An occurrence is simply something that happens, but a phenomenon is an occurrence that is incredibly special, rare, or culturally massive. Rain is an occurrence. A total solar eclipse is a phenomenon.
Understanding its cultural weight, let's read these. First, the release of the first iPod became a worldwide cultural phenomenon. Second, as a creator, Steve Jobs was a unique phenomenon in the technology industry. Third, sometimes the sudden popularity of a new app is an unexplained phenomenon. Functioning as a noun here, it explains that the iPod wasn't just a gadget people bought. It completely shifted culture and human behavior on a global scale. It also beautifully describes Jobs himself as an exceptionally rare type of creative leader. Lastly, it refers to any event that is massive, surprising, and often hard to completely comprehend at first glance.
Our seventh word is conventional. The American pronunciation is conventional. Conventional means based on what is generally done or believed. It means ordinary or traditional. It comes from the Latin convenire, meaning to come together or agree. Let's contrast synonyms. Normal means typical or expected. Conventional specifically refers to accepted rules, methods, or practices established by society. It is the exact opposite of alternative or radical.
In terms of his fateful choices, let's see. First, he refused to accept conventional medical treatments for his illness. Second, throughout his career, Apple's designs were never conventional. They always broke the rules. Third, conversely, she took a conventional path by going to college and finding a steady job. Notice how conventional describes standard, widely accepted medical practices, like surgery, which Jobs tragically rejected for alternative methods. When applied to his products, it emphasizes how Apple deliberately avoided doing things the normal way that older tech companies followed. Finally, it perfectly describes a traditional, safe life choice,
directly contrasting with Steve's early decision to drop out of college and forge his own unique path.
Our eighth word is inevitable. The American pronunciation is inevitable. Inevitable means a situation is certain to happen and completely unavoidable. It comes from Latin. The prefix in means not, and evitare means to avoid. So it literally translates to not able to be avoided. Let's look at a synonym distinction here. Likely means something will probably happen, but there's still a chance it won't. Inevitable means there is absolutely zero chance of stopping it.
Facing reality. First sentence, because he delayed the surgery, the spread of the disease became inevitable. Second, remember that when you take big risks, experiencing some failure is completely inevitable. Third, in business, the rise of smartphones made the decline of older cell phones inevitable. In that tragic first scenario, inevitable shows that once too much time had passed, absolutely no doctor could stop the cancer from spreading. In the second, it acts as a comforting rule. You simply cannot avoid failure if you are bravely trying new things. And in the final business application, it describes how technological progress always forces old, outdated technology to die out. It is a force that just cannot be stopped.
Our ninth word is profound. The American pronunciation is profound. Profound means very great or intense or showing deep insight and understanding. It comes from the Latin profundus, meaning deep. Let's contrast it with a synonym. Deep can describe physical space, like a deep ocean, or a casual thought, but profound is usually reserved for something that has a massive, significant, and lasting impact on the mind or emotions. You might have a deep conversation, but a profound realization completely changes your life.
Looking at the deeper meaning of his words. First, the advice he gave during his Stanford speech was truly profound. Second, earlier in life, losing his company had a profound impact on his personal growth. Third, on an emotional level, she felt a profound sense of sadness when she heard the news. When talking about his speech, profound describes words that contain intense, undeniable wisdom and truth. When applied to his failures, it describes an impact that wasn't just small or temporary, it changed him at his very core. And emotionally, it describes a feeling that is incredibly strong, overwhelming, and deep, rather than just a passing mood.
Our final word today is legacy. The American pronunciation is legacy. A legacy is something left or handed down by a predecessor. Essentially, it is how you are remembered after you are gone. It comes from the Latin legatus, meaning a person appointed or an ambassador. Let's look at a synonym distinction. An inheritance usually refers specifically to money, possessions, or property left to a family member. A legacy is much broader. It is the lasting impact, the ideas, the innovations, and the history a person leaves to the entire world.
Finally, observing his lasting footprint. First, Steve Jobs left behind a legacy of innovation that changed the world. Second, this reminds us that a true leader cares more about their legacy than their immediate wealth. Third, on a societal level, the museum was built to honor the historical legacy of the city. In this final context, legacy beautifully represents the lasting, permanent effect of his ideas on modern society. It contrasts long-term, meaningful impact against short-term, superficial money. Culturally, it refers to the historical footprint and the shared memories that are proudly handed down through generations.
Okay, great job sticking with me. Now let's do a quick recap of these words to ensure they stay firmly in your memory. We're going to group them by the chapters of Steve's life. First up, his rise and fall. Relentless means unstoppable. We saw this in his early garage days, right? His drive to build the best computers never weakened. Then came his devastating moment, being fired by the board. It was a highly destructive blow to his ego. But this revealed his resilience, his ability to bounce back, which he proved by refusing to quit and building Pixar instead.
Next up, his massive return to glory. He formed a complementary relationship with Bill Gates. They weren't just rivals. Their different skills actually completed each other and helped save Apple. This allowed Steve to focus on intuitive design, making products like the iPhone that are so natural you don't even have to think to use them. Because of this, the iPod and iPhone didn't just sell well, they became a cultural phenomenon, a completely remarkable event in global history.
And finally, the end of his journey. When facing cancer, he rejected conventional or traditional medicine for alternative therapies. Sadly, this delay made the spread of the disease inevitable. It became certain and unavoidable. Knowing his time was short, he delivered his profound, deeply meaningful speech at Stanford. Ultimately, he left us with a massive legacy, handing down innovations that will definitely be remembered for generations.
To wrap up our explainer today, I've got a really natural, high-level English idiom for you that perfectly describes Steve Jobs' experience of getting fired. The idiom is a blessing in disguise.
A blessing in disguise simply means a good thing that seemed very bad at first. Let's look at the logic behind it. A blessing is a gift or a great benefit. In disguise means wearing a costume so you cannot recognize it. So a blessing in disguise is a great gift that is wearing a terrible costume. When Steve Jobs was fired, it looked like a total tragedy, but underneath that disguise, it gave him the absolute freedom to create Pixar and become a much better leader. Here are two really natural ways you'll hear English speakers use this every day. Losing my job was a blessing in disguise because it forced me to finally start my own business. The rain ruining our outdoor picnic was a blessing in disguise. We stayed inside and had a wonderful, deep conversation instead.
Now, I have a short challenge for you. Step 1, I want you to think of a past failure or a devastating moment in your own life. Step 2, identify the positive outcome that eventually came from it. Try to write a sentence using our idiom. For example, failing that exam was a blessing in disguise because... Practicing this is not only going to improve your English, but honestly, it might just give you a totally new perspective on your own resilience.
As we close this chapter today, I want you to reflect on the most profound question of all. What will your legacy be? Thank you so much for joining me for this incredible story and lesson. If you want to continue practicing these words, connecting the dots of your English journey, and discussing this challenge with other learners, come join our community on Telegram at Fluent Mind. Until next time, stay relentless and keep learning.